Hi, everyone. Today's guest is Mr. Marvin Bryson, and he has spent decades doing something a lot of us only dream about, shaping stories that move people. From the editing bays of NBC's Law and Order to the pages of his own memoir, Marvin Bryson knows what it takes to build a narrative that lands. But here's one thing: life has had its own plot twists for him. So let's get into it. So, Mr. Bryson, welcome. You've worked in post production, you've written books, you've produced documentaries, and created a podcast series. How do you even introduce yourself at a dinner party?
That's a good question. I think most men identify themselves at work with their work, what they do professionally. So these days, I just introduce myself as a grandfather because that's my favorite job. But back in my Hollywood days, I would just simply call myself a filmmaker because I kind of know how to do multiple things in the film business, multiple positions on the film crew. And during my IT careers, whatever position, so it's like writer at work. So these days, I just introduce myself as a
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. So, you've spent years editing hundreds of episodes of broadcast television. What does shaping a narrative actually mean in the editing room? What are you really doing to a story?
Okay, well, I started in the business about 23 years ago, and everything was shot on film, first of all. And then back then, and even now on ABC, NBC, CBS, and Fox, you notice there's a lot of commercials. So a 1 hour program only lasts about 41, 42 minutes. But we would get 60 to 64-page scripts. And there's this software that's used called Final Draft. Miraculously, a final draft page generally equals one. So the challenge in 1 hour drama production is not blowing the narrative up, but losing 20 minutes. So you got to get rid of 20, but also make the narrative work. And a book can't tell you uh, because you really don't know what you have until you get the film, until you get the shot footage into an editing time. So what you wrote, you might think is going to work. What you shot, you might think is going to work, but you don't know that edit bay is the truth to what you shot. So that's really how I learned how to do it. In the TV world, you get a shooting script, but then that script is revised throughout production. And so you might get an updated script, and then you'll get a cut. For example, it's the editor's cut is the first cut. So it's all 64 minutes, 60 minutes. And then the editor will work with the director and basically put in their notes, and they'll get it a little shorter. Then there's a series of quote unquote producers cuts because broadcast television producers, directors really don't have the same type of power in broadcast TV, particularly on established shows. Shows that are established, as a director, you just don't want to muck it up. So anyway, over the course of, say, the 20, 30, 40 days that a show is being edited, they'll just keep whittling away until they get it to time. And once the show gets to time, we finish it and deliver it. That foundation I had working in broadcast television, shortening scripts up, helps me kind of remove the fat from a lot of scripts because in addition to all the other stuff I do, I'm a music supervisor too. But most of the filmmakers I know, they know I'm a producer, so they send me a cut of film and ask me for notes. And mostly I'm just telling them to consider losing stuff. You got too much stuff that doesn't need to be there, and it takes away from the narrative. So I think hopefully that's a pretty much a global view of how I shape a narrative.
Yeah. And speaking of that, you've described earning expertise through that process in shaping a narrative storyline through the TV post production, which sounds like you described just now. So, how does that editorial instinct carry over when you sit down to write a book, which you've done several times, or create a podcast of your own?
Okay, well, anything creatively that I do, I'm one of those 7 habits of highly successful people. So I begin with the end in mind. And what I didn't learn in film editing school, what I didn't learn working on independent stuff was quote unquote format. When I became an assistant editor on Law and Order, we had this thing called a format reel. So it was essentially the cold open, which is in New York City, and then there's basically 4 acts, and then there's a wrap up. So that's the format that you think about when you're writing for a 1 hour drama, at least that particular one. Different networks, different production companies got different formats. But that's the format I learned. And so, like, when I sat down to write my first book, Expectancy, I didn't do a whole lot of research on how to do it because it was more of a passion project. But once I wrote my first novel, I started doing some research. And the format I came up with is I need to have between 50 and 80,000 words. I need to have between 2,500 and 3,000 words a chapter. Now, those are just guidelines. And then, so I start off a format, and then you got to get into your characters after that. I don't even think about writing anything until I fully develop my characters. And what I do is I also give my characters, I guess, a stock character definition. The hero, the villain, the aide, blah, blah, blah. And then that helps me write them better. So even though that particular character is unique, they are still a type. And it took me a while to kind of, incorporate that in my process. And then, when you got that, at that point, you just start writing. And writing is rewriting. So you just write until you get it right.
I like that. Write until you get it right.
Yeah.
That's catchy. It's something to remember.
Okay.
And what is the most common mistake that storytellers make, like writers, podcasters, content creators like myself? What is the common mistake that we make when trying to shape the narrative?
Well, particularly for younger writers, people who just get into writing, they try to cover too much. They just literally try to put too much in the story. You can't put everything in it. And then people, they try to cover too much ground. And then they also overwrite. They'll say the same thing twice in one sentence. So you got to say, okay, do I want to say it this way or do I want to say it that way? So those are the two things that most new writers do. They try to cover too much ground. They overwrite. So you really should be looking for an economy of words. I learned how to do this like I've learned how to do everything else. So my personal take is, you got to think economy of words. Particularly because even when you're writing a novel, you got room to do everything you want. And there's also a rhythm. That's one of the reasons why I was so good in post, because I'm a musician. I understand a rhythm. When I write, my writing has a rhythm to it. Because even my feature scripts, my scripts, my books, my monographs, whatever, even essays, I try to give them a rhythm. That way it can be a quick read. I don't ever want to write anything that's dense. Somebody got to stop and go back and read the sentence again. That's not my goal.
That makes a lot of sense too. That's how you can take multiple areas and combine those skills, taking the music as well as the writing.
Yeah, well, that's another fun thing about writing. I mean, you can bring your whole life to it. You can bring your whole body to it. You can bring your whole experience to it, and you should, because that's where your voice is gonna come from. Your voice is gonna come from your experiences.
That's right. That's right. And speaking of storytelling and experience, your memoir Expectancy came out of a deeply personal experience that you had as a caregiver for 10 years. And how did you decide that that particular story was worth telling? And how did you figure out the shape of that story?
Well, it's a story I had to tell just to kind of save myself, because those 10 years that I was my mother's caregiver was just brutal, mentally and emotionally. You know, I literally forgot how to connect to people. And then, it was really hard on me and my brothers and my sister. And so I just wanted to tell my side of the story. But also, I just wanted to do some self care, because if you say something, if you write it down, it kind of goes, you're giving some of it away. So you're not holding on to too much of it. My mom had Alzheimer's and dementia. And if you know, Alzheimer's and dementia is one of those diseases that slowly progresses, right? So it's not something you can really
Mm-hmm.
make a plan for. It's a slow creep at the end of the day. So that's how I wrote it, because I think if you look at the chapters, I think it's my introduction to estate planning, because that is a huge part of being a caregiver or coming up with a care plan is the estate. And I think I got a chapter in there called the accidental caregiver. My mom didn't die till she was in her 90s. So toward the end of her life, she started to outspend what she had. She started to outspend her savings and her benefits and stuff. And if you look at the price of, nursing homes, bringing in home health people, something like that, it could easily be $10,000, $15,000 a month. But that's $100,000, $150,000 a year. So in 10 years, went through almost 2 million. And so, having, you know, 2, 3 million, you might think you're sitting pretty. But if you live deep into retirement and depending on your lifestyle, ain't gonna be enough. So those are some of the things I want to talk about. My slogan for the book, my catchphrase for the book is share the book and start the conversation, because that's the only reason I wrote the book. Everything was just beating me up. I'm like, I'm trying, I'm just
Yeah.
counterpunching, trying to survive. It's still kind of, honestly, she passed away in 2019. I still got PTSD in a way, because it's, I don't think it's a situation you understand until you've been in it. It's like being married, having a parent pass away, having children. I think if you're not in any of those particular situations, you can empathize and you can imagine, but until you walk that path, you don't really understand it.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for sharing. The writer's strike of 2007 hit, which is another pivotal point. And then that's when you became the full-time caregiver. So looking back, how did that experience change the stories that you wanted to tell?
Well, interestingly enough, a good friend of mine and I were two good friends. We started a development company in 2006. And most of the time, people hear about pre-production, production, post-production, right? But development
Mm-hmm.
is that part in the process where you put the project together. It's where you get the script rights, story rights. You hire your key people, like your director, your key actors, and all that type of stuff, and set up your finances. So a lot of times, development takes longer than it takes to produce the movie. I'm a paralegal. I became a paralegal because when I was a musician, I got tired of getting screwed because I didn't know how to read a contract. And then in my IT career, I had budgets in the multi-millions of dollars. So I can read a budget, figure it out pretty quick. And I can read a legal document and figure it out pretty quick. We had our development company kind of, it was like the little engine that could, and then the writer strike hit. So 2007, 2008, it's not quite as bad as it is right now, but everything just came to a screeching halt. So if you wasn't a company with a long track record, it was really hard to get money. And so I didn't want to go back to working for somebody. I mean, I love working on Law and Order. I love working on the other shows I worked on. I'm like, I want my show, So I'm not gonna, you know, I mean, I didn't really go to Hollywood or get into storytelling to find a good gig and just stay there forever. I'll find a company and just be there. I wanted to experience different ways of production, different genres, things like that. So anyway, I decided to take a year off because I had been grinding, grinding, grinding. I don't know, probably for 6, 8 years. And I had a conversation with my sister. My brother just bought a house in Greensboro. He's like, "Yo, man, you stay in my house. You're not moving into it anytime." And so I just went to Greensboro to help my sister. And my older brother passes away. He lives in Memphis, so I'm doing his estate. His estate takes me like a year and a half to close. So instead of being in North Carolina for a year, I blink and turn my head. I've been there 2 years, right? And I also really didn't know how bad my mother's addiction. So it was getting worse, but she could still do a lot of the thing called ADL, activities of daily living. So she could still do a lot of her ADL, but she was having problems. And honestly, I tried to leave. I went to Atlanta for 3 or 4 months, but Atlanta in 2011, not Atlanta, the Atlanta 20. Atlanta in 2011 was Atlanta wanted. I mean, there was a lot of second tier cable stuff. God got me back to Greensboro. He got me back to Greensboro because my mother's health like really crap. So it started
Okay.
off with her burning stuff up on the stove. Every time you look up, it's smoke detector. So I ended up taking the buttons off the stove, right? Then all of a sudden get a late bill notice, get another bill notice. It's like, hey man, you want me to start paying the bills? It's like, sure, thank you. And then eventually you gotta take a car key. And then, start having an emergency room. Then you go to the emergency room, it's so bad you gotta go to a rehab center. Go emergency room rehab center a couple times. Now it's assisted living, you know. And then as they progress, a lot of people don't know it goes home health, assisted living, skilled nursing, palliative care, and hospice. Those are the last 5 steps before we check out in general. If you got an
Mm-hmm.
accident, you don't go through that. But if you're an average everyday human being, again, it's home, assisted living, skilled nursing, palliative care, and hospice. That's something I talk about in my book too, because people have to understand that all 5 of those things require a lot of care on the caregiver's part. It killed me to put my mother in assisted living, first of all, but I knew it was what was best for her because she needed to. And it wasn't about what was going to make me feel good. In my mind, it was about what was going to make her feel. I don't know.
That's
I
right.
don't know if you've read, but a lot of people who are caregivers, right after their personal caregiving pass away, they pass because they just depleted themselves. If they don't pass,
Yeah, that happened in my family.
yeah. So if they
Mm-hmm.
don't pass, they develop some type of heinous, illness. So that's kind of like what I just synopsized is basically 8 years, 10 years from basically 2008, 2019. And I wrote Expectancy in 2016 and Repeat in 2017. But again, I've always been one. I've never had a problem expressing myself. A lot of people they say they want to record a record or they want to make music, but that's hard to do. And then they say, well, okay, I want to make a movie. That's hard to do. Say I want to write a book. It's really hard to do. Because documentaries take years of your life. They literally take years of your life. You not. At least I'm not gonna. I can't write a novel in 6 months. And
It's a marathon,
yeah,
right?
it's definitely a marathon. And I mean, but I mean, so you got to be up for it. I can't tell you how many people have approached me to help them out, and I'll just send them a quick outline of what needs to be done, and I don't hear from them anymore. Respect to the people who've
Crickets.
approached me, but you gotta know who you are. I taught television production in 2019 at the College of Baltimore, and my first day of class is since I've been doing this for so long. I have a 15-minute primer on how to have a successful media. So the first couple of cards of that is my background. So I show an album I produced, a book I wrote, and a TV show. And then I kind of explain I'm in the guild, the Editors Guild. I've done 400 episodes of TV. I essentially tell them the only thing I hadn't done in television is get rich and are famous. 99% of the people who are in TV and film, I mean, you're just a regular working person. Everybody. I mean, you got Will Smith, Brad Pitt, George Clooney, Tom Cruise. They're the only people making $20 million a film. Everybody else is making, $1,500, $2,000 a week, or maybe $15,000 or $20,000 for a film, $40,000 for a film, but they work 4 months and then they don't have a job. So they got to make that 40,000 last until they get another job. There's three times the people in industry that I see. People want to get rich, people want to get famous, people that do it because they have to. And I put myself in that third category. It's like I can't quit it. I've tried to quit it. I walked away from it, but I always end up back happy. Get into real estate, law, medicine, start your own body shop, garage, HVAC, all that. That's the way to get rich. If you want to get famous, just do something stupid.
Well, your expertise that you just mentioned has been recognized by the Producers Guild of America Diversity
Right.
Workshop, the Congressional Black Caucus, and the LA International Screenplay
Right.
Awards. So, what does it mean to you that the stories you're choosing to tell are being recognized by those specific spaces?
Well, it feels great actually. You know, anytime you get recognized, it feels good, of course. Right. There's only 450,000 union jobs in America for television and film. That's everybody. Transportation, grip and electric, actors, hair, makeup, you name it, only 450 jobs. Right? With this latest strike, writers they like 1,300 writers have lost their job. You know, it's gone from maybe 4,000 to about 2. So you got a couple 100,000, couple million people competing for 2,000 jobs. So knowing that, I'm completely comfortable with the amount of success I've had. And if you think about it, the diversity thing was in 2007. The caucus thing was in the 20 teens, and the LA film thing was like last year. So every 5, 6, 7 years or so, I'll do something to where somebody says good job, you know. And a lot of times you're happy with that because I used to shoot a lot of casting sessions with Dick Wolf. And one of Dick's favorite phrases is many are called and few are chosen, right? So, and and it's true. It's just not that many jobs out there. So
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, you had your story and stories to tell. And for someone who has their own story to tell, maybe a life experience, a hard season, a passion that they want to share, but they don't know where to start, what's the first real step in shaping it into something that others can connect with them?
well, first and foremost, just think universally. If you're a black person, don't feel like you got to limit yourself to black stories. If you're indigenous, don't feel like you got to limit yourself to indigenous. If you're part of the majority community, I don't feel like that eliminates you from telling stories about the other communities. So just think about everybody wants love, everybody feels pain. If you're a parent, you want your children to do good, and things like that. So just kind of touch on the universal things, right? And the bigger your population of your audience, the more money you can make. So if you're gonna, limit yourself to 20 million people instead of 400 million Americans, you kind of you're putting yourself in a deficit you don't need to put yourself at. If you look behind me, there's a book up there I wrote with a guy named Hayward Donaldson, and it's called The King's Path. Hayward approached me to help him write a movie, but once we started talking about it, I'm like, man, this is a book. This is a series. This is not this a novel. So anyway, Haywood signed with his group. He was in a go-go band that signed with Delicious Vinyl Records, and so 3-act structure too is very important. People gotta understand 3-act structure. Everything is 3-act structure. I mean, a commercial has a 3-act structure. Okay, so like everybody sees car commercials, right? So they're like, okay, here's the new whatever model it is, right? And then the story is about the car and the features, right? And then the third part is this is where you buy it, right? So the first part, what it is and where you buy it, is not the story. The story happens in the second in the second act, essentially. So the first act, you just set everything up. The second act, you tell the story. And then the third act, you kind of say, okay, this is what this person's going to look like later. So Hayward, when I got together, he was in his 40s. So I could not tell his whole story. Say, look, man, we got to focus on that year that you guys signed with Delicious Final. And so that's what 80% of the book is. It's about that year. And that year, I got my first industry job working at Paramount. I came to LA to do music, but I didn't get a chance to really do it because I was just too busy working. And but at the end of the day, that's what you got to do. You got to look at if you're trying to tell a life story, you can't tell the whole story. You got to pick a season, then you got to do a backstory that gets that lead character into that season. So fiction, it all goes back to the character development. So I always start off with, most of the time, my writing process really is informed by something I can see. So I did my first short film way back in 2002. It's this lovely, she's still a lovely young woman named Jael DePardo that agreed to act in it for me. But when I was writing the story, I had her headshot up on the wall, just so I could see, who my character was going to be. And that's kind of been a default in my process. As soon as I get a character, I figure out a picture for him, and then I just try to give him as many layers as I can. Because the more layers that I give him, the more places I can go when I'm writing. And then secondly, the more layers that you give them, the more interesting they become. Because most of us aren't just one thing. I kind of use that main character biography as kind of a place to play with my story arc for a little bit too. And then I get the protagonist, and while I'm writing there, I mean the antagonist. And when I'm writing their particular character, same thing. While I'm writing that character, I'm visualizing where is this person going to intersect with the antagonist, right? And then I always try to have a super serious person, a super funny person, because it's a funny story. It can't be funny all the time. You gotta have serious parts, and vice versa with serious stories. So that's what I would suggest to them: 3-act structure. Hang out with your main character, and just spend some time with him. Because for my novels, I got a spreadsheet, and so I'll write 4 scenes, and I'll do a word count, and then I'll say, okay, these kind of work as a chapter, and then if they do, I'll name the chapter, I'll put it in my matrix, and I'll keep moving. So have a process, have some benchmarks, and like the benchmark should be life and death, but you should have it. That's why a lot of people don't finish. They don't have a plan. They just figure, okay, I'm going to figure it out. What do people say?
That spreadsheet allows you to track your progress, and then you know what's been
Yeah,
done, right? As a project manager, I can relate to that.
And that's another thing. When you're an artist, you're a project manager of your project, and you are the CEO of your business. So if you don't handle your accounting, if you don't handle your project planning, it don't matter what you do creatively. And even if you don't handle it, you have to understand it enough to talk to the person who's doing it for you, to make sure they're not screwing you over. People think, okay, I signed a record deal and I'm good to go. No, you sign a record deal, it's a loan against sales. Same thing with a book advance. I made myself learn about the publishing business. I made myself learn about that particular business. But to me, the most exciting thing right now in visual media in 2025 is like music in 1995. So back in 1995, the internet just took over. You didn't need a label. You didn't need nobody. You could just do your own stuff, release it, and you're good to go, right? But with the film industry, it wasn't like that. But now, film and television, with all these platforms and stuff like that, I don't even know what the industry is anymore, to be honest with you. Back when I started, it made sense. You knew what success was. You knew what it was measured by. Back in the day, it was all the Nielsen ratings. And it still is on broadcast
TV. Well, you're in your early 60s, and you don't have to tell your age, right?
TV.
Without
I feel,
since you told us
I
about your
feel blessed to be
experience.
62, be 63 in a couple of
Oh
weeks.
yeah. Oh yeah. But I mean, the experience speaks for itself, right? Because you've seen so much change over time and you're still writing, producing, and advocating. So what's the story that you have not yet told that you would like to tell next?
Uh, I'm a big film noir fan. Like Devil in a Blue Dress, LA Confidential, Act the Dust, all the, fedoras and trench coats and tough guy things. So actually, I'm about 10,000 words into my next novel, which is that. It's Cooley. So the guy's name's Wilton Cooley. He's it's set in DC, my hometown. He got injured on the job and had to retire from the police force. And so he does background checks on all these rich, muckety, powerful people that roll through DC. And he gets pulled into this caper, trying to figure out this caper. I got up to about, I think, 4 chapters and maybe 10, 12,000 words. So I had to get back into my characters, get back into my arc. And, so right now I'm, uh, I'm basically, uh, in writing and television writing, which is how I learned how to write, they call it beats. So I'm back in working on my beats. And a beat is just basically a sentence that describes a scene. And then those scenes describe an arc. So, if you do the beats, as I do my beats, I move them around sometimes, follow some basic rules. Like, don't introduce or set up something that you're not going to pay off later. If it's not part of the narrative, why talk about it? And that's just a basic thing. So set up, payoff, and then, most of your characters should change or should try to change over the course of the project, course of the story. So, but they don't necessarily have to change. They could just want to change, and don't know how. And lastly, if you see the other book up there in the corner, the football book, that's called August Heat. And that's essentially the first screenplay I ever wrote back in 2002, right? And remember, I told you that most writers, they overwrite and try to tell too much. That made August Heat write for a novel. So all the stuff I couldn't do on screen, I could do in a book. And so basically, I'm kind of backwards. Most people, they take a book and try to adapt it into a film. A lot of my screenplays, particularly my early screenplays, are perfect to be novels. So I got about 4 of them on deck. So I got stuff I could write for the next 5, 10 years. So I'm happy about that.
That's great. Something to look forward to.
Yeah, always. Yeah.
Well, my last question is, what do you want people who've never thought of themselves as storytellers to walk away knowing after hearing you today?
First and foremost, everybody has a story to tell, right? You can tell you can tell your story, but the question is, are you willing to put in the work? Are you willing to take that year or two it's going to take to write? And then I talked about self-publishing earlier. J.D. Salinger, who wrote the legendary book Catcher in the Rye, and Catcher in the Rye is still like one of the best-selling books. One of the best-selling books every year. Has been for like 80 years. He goes to talk to one of his professors. His professor, you got to realize this is like 1930s New York. So you got Hemingway, you got all the great, all the people who wrote all the great novelists, but it's when they were all kids going to school, young, whatever. So J.D. Salinger went to his instructor, and he was like, he was just so upset that he wasn't getting published like everybody else, and this to put it to the direct, his instructor said, if you're not willing to write and create stories that nobody will ever read, because that's a great possibility, you're not really a writer. I mean, I write, I play music, I make films because I'm compelled to, not because I choose to. I mean, I've tried not to. I probably could have made a whole lot more money and been in a whole different space socioeconomically with the different acumens I have, but I wouldn't be happy. You can do it, but you got to be willing to put in the work, and you got to understand that it may not be any payoff other than self-satisfaction. That's why I was saying having my work recognized by those three organizations you talked about. And then, I've pitched to major networks, major producers, blah, blah, blah. You got to be willing to go through those 499 no's to get that yes on the 500th try. And everybody's not built that way. And I think that's why a lot of people never just go all in. Because my thing is you got to give up who you are to become who you want to be. There's no way I would have got hired on the Law and Order crew trying to do it while I had a day job, trying to get into that. The business side of this thing is torture. So, and I understand that's why, a lot of people, friends that I know, I got friends on all different type of levels, they get to a certain level and they find it's okay, because it's hard to walk away from your life, and that's probably one of the reasons I never got married or anything like that, because I needed to be flexible to make these moves. At least that's how I rationalize it anyway. So, you can do it at the end of the day. This you got to do is try.
Well, excellent. Well, Mr. Bryson, has been a rich conversation. Thank you so much. Thank you for your time. And friends, if today reminded you that your story matters and that it can be shaped into something powerful, hit subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next on the channel, and drop a comment below. And think about a story from your own life if you've been afraid to tell it. I'll read all of the comments, and I will see you soon.
Bye-bye. Thank you.